Good afternoon, everyone. It is a pleasure to welcome you to today's installation of the MDIC Case for Quality Collaborative Community Forum. Today's portion of the forum focuses on Case for Quality as a collaborative community, the culture of quality, and Make CAPA Cool pilot study. Tomorrow's portion of the forum focuses on advanced manufacturing, computer software assurance, and the Accelerate Sustainable Capability pilot study. Each day's panel presentation will be followed by a live Q&A session with each panel. I'm excited about the great panels we have today and tomorrow, featuring esteemed representatives from industry and the FDA. These are wonderful groups, and I'm certain you will find the panels very helpful. My name is Alan Baumel. I am the Program Director for the Case for Quality Collaborative Community, and now I am pleased to introduce our next presenters, Joe Sapiente and Cisco Vicente, on the Case for Quality as a collaborative community. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Joe Sapiente. I'd like to welcome you all to the MDIC Case for Quality Collaborative Community session. Today with me, I have Cisco Vicente. Cisco is the program manager for the Case for Quality within the Centers for Devices and Radiological Health, CDRH, with FDA. Welcome, Cisco.
Thank you very much, Joe. It's great to be here, even if it's virtually, to be able to talk about some of the work we've been doing.
Yeah, I agree. It's really, again, before we get started, I want to thank MDIC and FDA for giving us the opportunity to chat today. Today's format, similar to the others that you'll see during the forum, is more of a casual conversation. As Cisco mentioned, we're virtual, so we'll kind of keep this more casual, rather than a formal presentation, but we do have a few slides that we will speak to. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. And Cisco, up here is really the definition of a collaborative community. And I think we all know that the Case for Quality was really founded on being highly collaborative. So in essence, becoming a collaborative community really makes perfect sense for the Case for Quality. But if you don't mind, can you expand on kind of the value of a collaborative community and maybe share with us your thoughts on a term that I've heard you use before in the interactive ecosystem?
Sure thing. And I think you'll see as we talk a little bit about what we think about a collaborative community from a CDRH standpoint, how well some of the work we've been doing up until now in Case for Quality fit. But the center has really been focused on being able to participate and be part of these broader efforts that are not driven by the agency. They're not driven by agency. They're not driven solely by providers. It's really, more broad efforts and initiatives to tackle bigger problems. And that always was a fundamental part of addressing, and you highlighted here in the slides, right, the increasing complexity of the medical devices and the use environment that they're in, right? That broad applicability phase. Things are starting to get a lot more complex with regards to software, with the need for connectivity, the capabilities of different users and the communities that they are actually actively used in. This is something that has been a challenge for a while. It's not a situation or a solution that is only within FDA's purview or industry's purview to fix. So the idea of these collaborative communities was to help bring all the people together who can define a much better solution. And if the solution that exists and comes out from that community group is within FDA's rules, guidelines, and is advancing that public safety mission, the agency would work then to take that and, as much as possible, adapt it and figure out how to turn it into policy. The Case for Quality effort that we've had up until now has really been based along that principle of bringing together the entire community, as you mentioned beforehand, the whole interactive ecosystem to really solve some of the problems and advance that quality focus that we wanted to really drive at. Some of the complexity and some of the solutions aren't necessarily something that we, the agency, can enforce on. And again, without some of the input and value from the other stakeholders, it's not something industry can correct either. So it's really been the foundational way we've been operating in Case for Quality. So when this whole collaborative community effort kicked off at the center, it's something that just made sense to start transitioning to as, you know, the partnership started to mature.
So that's great, Cisco. And I'm going to change and talk a little bit about the history. You touched on it, sort of how we started and where we started. And you'll see, you know, while there was activity in the pre-2015 timeframe around Case for Quality, things really started to get a lot more momentum with the, you know, initiation of the BAA. And then it's really, when you look at this, I was amazed when I thought about it. It's only been 5 years, right? I mean, really, it's only been 5 years, and you can talk about all of the things that we've accomplished under the Case for Quality, including, you know, the VIP program, the governance committee for VIP, and most recently the announcement that MDIC's been, you know, has been a collaborative community with the FDA participation. So as we start to think about, you touched on sort of the collaborative, how collaborative Case for Quality has been and how foundational it's been. So when I look at this slide, something that I look at is that, you know, the first picture on the left hand side of the screen, where, you know, that is essentially the, you know, proactive working groups. I mean, that's where we're working together to identify some of those challenges, and that's kind of the start of the ecosystem, if you would. And then the aligned mission to accelerate the science-based solutions. And what does accelerate mean, and how do we, you know, when we think about acceleration, we're thinking about change, we're thinking about transformation, we're thinking about innovation and influence. And then finally, you know, what some of the things that we've always talked about as a group is, you know, how do we get to consensus? And you'll see in other slides, consensus really is achieved through the working groups and the committees and the conversation, that collaborative discussion and participation. So any thoughts on how this ecosystem is working, and any thoughts about what we're going to be thinking about in 2021 before we talk about that? I mean, we're going to talk a little bit more about 2021, but maybe a reflection on 2020.
Yeah, and I actually, I love the way the slide here points things out, being a mechanical engineer and taking it back down to some physics capability there. The idea of bringing in the community, first of all, you know, as we look back at 2020, what we've been able to do with that is see that when you're bringing everybody together with one focused problem, the solutions are better, and there's that immediate buy-in across the whole spectrum, right? Everybody is looking to really drive towards the same goal, and that, you know, safer medical device, better outcomes for patients. But what's been great about that collaboration is you bring in all the right voices, right? When we needed to, we brought in some of those patient voices to understand, you know, where were their frustrations and where were their objectives and goals. Some of the industry voices to find out what was working and what wasn't working. Our standpoint from the agency, you know, what do we need to see? What are we looking to make sure we're assuring from that end? When everybody lays those cards out on the table in that collaboration, I think there's that initial trust to begin with, that this is really about moving that needle and solving the problem, not an antagonistic, you know, gotcha scenario. But secondly, there are things that people have proposed. I know solutions that have come from some of those other stakeholders that I think from an agency standpoint, we would never have thought of, or would have said, there's no way industry would go for this. And it surprisingly came from industry and said, we should probably do this. And that's where you start to get that, I like that acceleration, right? We do get, you know, some of those changes in directions and that change in speed of doing things, because now there isn't that fight against each other or that misunderstanding as to why we're doing it. Everybody's moving in the same pace and direction.
Yeah, and thanks for that. Just to let folks know that, you know, this is again the framework for a lot of our forums, and you know, going into 2021, we'll be planning additional forums, and you know, we've got things in the works already for what does 2021 look like. And so we'll be doing more forums, whether they're virtual or not. We certainly do plan on having them. And we also have the annual public forum, which will continue to provide regular updates, but not to lose sight of the importance of the working groups, which is really a lot of the work that's done behind the scenes in those working groups. So when we get together for these forums, it's a real pleasure to talk about the activity, the progress of the working groups, and folks will hear more about that in day 2 of this December forum. So so Cisco, I'm gonna switch a little bit and talk a little bit more about FDA's participation in the collaborative community, and if you don't mind, sort of, we talked about the announcement, we talked about how MDIC in partnership with FDA. And we've had this partnership for quite some time. When you look at the original Venn diagram, it was FDA, industry, and then the payer providers, academia. So can you talk a little bit about sort of how it's working today? And we've got an example here where NEST is an example of a collaborative community, but maybe some thoughts on Case for Quality in 2021.
So I think the idea that now that we are a collaborative community, right, it sets a little bit more of that framework of trust across the board, because the collaborative community, as listed there, isn't something that FDA leads. Right? It really is intended to be an engagement of equals, right? FDA is a part of the community. It participates in the community. It brings its perspective to the community, but it's not us who sets the solutions. It's not us who drives what is the best outcome. If policy needs to be adapted, that's where we would come in and take the input and output for us. But this becomes a situation where, I think the right stakeholders, the right experts are coming together and sharing and kind of cross-pollinating that best practice, that knowledge base.
Yeah.
So as we go forward into 2021, I think with the transition into that collaborative community aspect, you will see that there'll be more of those voices coming in. We did a lot of work. We haven't done a lot of outreach into some of the other stakeholder groups yet, but that's part of the plan moving forward, so that we start to bring in more of that additional expertise or the voices that we need to get to keep moving the needle. There's been a lot of really great output. There's a lot of real potential with some of the new activities. You'll see like MDIC and everything moving forward, but we need now those other voices.
Yeah, I agree. I think where you talk about participate as members of the collaborative community, and it's not so much, well, what does the FDA want and how do we sort of work to get there? It's what can we all adapt and develop and bring forward as a group versus, well, the FDA said, gave us this mission and we're off on this mission, right? Let's talk a little bit about, you mentioned the other stakeholders and you mentioned MDIC a second ago. So when you look at this diagram, and if we were to go back 5 years, the original diagram consisted of FDA, industry, and the providers, academia, patients, and payers. But clearly over the last 5 years, and certainly through the case for the collaborative community, we've been able to really do a lot more. And I think going forward, we're going to be able to do even more than what's on here. But when you think about some of the graphics that are going to come up, the thing that I wanted to point out was that, you mentioned is the ecosystem earlier, and certainly this does demonstrate there's truly an ecosystem. The fact that it's highly interactive, and some of the things that were original work streams are now programs that are standing up within the Case for Quality. So you've got, the MDIC work that you mentioned, and certainly the volunteer, the appraisal method and the voluntary program, things that are standing up and becoming really part of the collaborative community, but have steering committees or teams, where there's a real leadership in terms of setting direction, bringing up proposals that will then be managed through the case, or convened through the collaborative community. So any thoughts in terms of what this what this Venn diagram might look like at the end of 2021, and maybe some thoughts about some things that we know that we're adopting around, and I'm speaking specifically around the medical, the advanced manufacturing, what that might look like in 2021 this time next year.
Yeah, so that's interesting because especially with regards to bringing in some of the new projects, right? Oftentimes, you know, the way we've treated them and kicked them off is as one of the efforts here, for example, in VIP program, hits a barrier and needs some systemic problem that needs to be tackled. It brings it to light. And beforehand, it was just, okay, we bring it to light within the governance of the Case for Quality Steering Committee. And we choose a path forward for how to resolve that, right? The CAPA pilot is a big example of that. We saw a problem being identified strictly within how things were operating under the VIP program, brought that to the steering committee, and a decision was made to engage in this outside pilot to try to reset that structure and framework. Now, what we're talking about in 2021 is not just, is that program the only one that's giving us the output or the bigger, you know, systemic issues that we're identifying. Now we've got opportunities, especially with, you know, MDIC, to have that input coming in from providers, patients, payers, more of the active participation. So I envision more of that information set after the 21 timeframe coming out of us and coming up with a more, I think, robust set of projects that the whole community could say, yeah, that's the one that's going to move the needle. And it's going to take, yes, some improvements from industry side. We'll work on that in VIP. It's going to take some more information. Let's work on that in MDIC, but it's going to take us as patients and providers being willing to either shift something in behavior or provide more of this information to both entities, and getting that active exchange developed, which, you know, right now it's essential. It's part of what it's intended to be, but the channels aren't fully developed yet.
Okay. So we've talked a lot about the collaborative community, the structure, the basis for Case for Quality founded on collaboration. And this kind of goes back and explains the Venn diagram. And I think you've touched on really what I had as our last slide, which was really how the structure and the concept that we have going forward, where we've got the Case for Quality Steering Committee, we've got MDIC, we've got VIP. You mentioned CAPA and Quality as a Career, data analytics, and the C-suite. You know, we'll hear again some more from the CAPA Cool group, as well as the C-suite or the leadership engagement. We have a session on that as well. But just some thoughts, my thoughts on 2021 as we talk about where we are and where we're headed as a steering committee. What things that we've talked about that we could share with the rest of the broader group are things like, you know, that safe space discussion, and, you know, where do we tackle other challenges, and how do we leverage the MDIC to help us sort of get into some of that safe space discussion. What's not on here is the conversations that we've been having about advanced manufacturing, and, you know, we're starting to build momentum there. So I think 2021, and certainly would appreciate your comments about 2021 as we start thinking about what advanced manufacturing, you know, what are maybe what you would like to see is kind of the first couple of steps to achieve by, you know, the next 6 or so months. What does advanced manufacturing look like within your vision, and then the vision of Case for Quality?
Yeah, I think with the idea of the advanced manufacturing focus, and it's a lot of the work that MDIC will be starting to engage and take some point on. It's really about enabling the technologies and capabilities in a much faster fashion than I think it would be if it were just waiting for us to issue policy or to try to issue guidance around them. In order to, you know, when we talk about the learnings and the outputs of practices, the better ways to do things from the VIP program, I see the advanced manufacturing efforts and work directly supporting maybe maybe simplifying, making some of those practices easier to manage and to execute on, to drive that kind of seamless compliance. So it's not a big driver, it's just the output piece of it. The work from VIP, identifying, here's where we have a need for a advanced manufacturing solution that then would go and get tackled on as a separate project or entity through the clearinghouse concept, right? As the technologies start to build up within industry, we will hopefully drive more of that data and information focus, which then feeds into the MDIC concepts. Mm-hmm. So the more digital, the more of that transformation we enable, the better the information set and the faster the information set that can feed MDIC, the better we can get about understanding, not just the connections that are driven by the quality system work plus, what happens in the ecosystem, but down to actually is it performing or affecting the product. It's all set to try to link and support each other, right? But a lot of the efforts that we're doing here are enabling activities for that linkage.
Yeah, I think if you look back where we were, in the very beginning, we had, in that 2015 after the BAA, the case for quality work streams, we had 4. Remember the original 4, right. Which one of them became the VIP governing committee today. And as you can see, just based on this diagram, they're going to have they already have some ongoing working groups that they've chartered and that they've reinitiated some of those. We anticipate that what's coming out of MDIC will actually be very similar in the working group. So in reality, there may be, when we had our original approach to having 4 per year, we're talking potentially double and almost tripling that this year through these other committees. So it's pretty exciting to see how we've evolved. We've gotten much more, and we haven't lost focus, I guess is the comment I want to make. We really have never really lost focus with all of these work streams because they're all committed to the case for quality, the foundation, the mission, and the vision of the case for quality. So in the time we have left, we've got a couple minutes. Any closing thoughts you wanted to share with the group?
And I think I like what you just mentioned there, that idea that it hasn't lost focus, because when you look at a lot of the activities, it seems like there's a lot of work and there's always that opportunity for, that disconnected effort or kind of the scope creep. But, the idea that even up until now, they haven't lost their focus, even though it sounds like it's something not related, it was because of an output or another activity that is connected to that broader objective that project is going on, and you could see the direct connection. Mm-hmm. So it's very easy to do that. And now under the guise of the collaborative community, what we have the opportunity to do is to get more of the whole community that's going on, that is active in the ecosystem, actually getting a voice into that connection, right? That set of projects that link up. So I think it's just going to be an accelerator for some of the work moving forward. And hopefully, as more people engage and participate, again, there's that more collective sharing of the effort and activities, so more resources will come to bear around the work as we move forward.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great way to end it. It's kind of a call to action, right? Because we're going to be asking for more participants in the case for quality. There'll be more work streams. There'll be work that'll be as we move into the sort of the manufacturing and advanced manufacturing, which you've said many times is much more than just manufacturing. It's really within that product life cycle. So we anticipate getting a lot more stakeholders involved and maybe some of the other functions within a medical device firm that isn't the typical QARA, but more right. R&D, manufacturing, and supplier quality would be a great addition to our ecosystem. So I'm going to end it here. I'm going to thank you for your time, and it's always a pleasure to meet with you and speak to you. Hopefully we'll be in person in a few months. We could exchange stories about vaccines and whether or not we got one of the 4 vaccines or 3 vaccines that's out there now. But thanks again. I appreciate it. And again, thank you to MDIC for giving us the opportunity to share our thoughts with the broader group today. And we'll be happy to answer questions as they come in. So thank you.
Hello, my name's Pat Schaefer. I'm a managing director at FTI Consulting. I lead the regulatory and quality practice within life sciences, where we serve large global as well as private pre-revenue life sciences clients. Prior to that, I was a life sciences leader at Grant Thornton, and before that at Deloitte Consulting. And my earliest work in quality was back in the 80s when I met Joseph Duran, and with Duran Institute, worked to spread the gospel of quality, producing quality training tools such as the Quality Minutes, and also helped build General Motors Quality College. Today with me is Joe Sapiente. Joe is Vice President of Quality Assurance and Regulatory Affairs, Surgical Breast and Skeletal Health for Hologic Incorporated. Prior to Hologic, Joe served as Vice President of Quality Operations and Compliance at Medtronic. Prior to Medtronic, he was with Covidien, where he led the Quality Begins With Me Culture Initiative. And before that, he was at Tyco Healthcare and US Surgical, where he held executive leadership roles. Over the years, he has a proven track record of establishing regulatory and quality programs that are key elements of the strategic plan, and directing regulatory programs that result in accelerated approvals. Joe is the chair of the Medical Device Innovation Consortium, MDIC, Case for Quality. I'm just going to do this. Everyone knows MDIC, so I'm just going to say, Joe is the chair of the MDIC Case for Quality Collaborative Community, the steering committee, and has been an active member of the Case for Quality since 2012. Our work stream is entitled Leadership Engagement. It's really all about helping build a culture of quality. What we're trying to do is influence CEOs and key leadership of medical device companies to move from a culture of compliance to a culture of quality, a culture of continuous improvement. We want to promote quality as a strategic priority, being integral to all parts of the organization through strong leadership, strategic alignment, and tone at the top. As you can see, we have several team members who collaborated during this process. Our approach was really to first identify and then rationalize culture practices. We had probably some 20 to 30 different practices that were recommended, but we were then able to narrow that to the top 10. Once we had arrived at that top 10, we worked through a survey to capture an industry baseline on these top 10 practices. And when we then identified the gaps, moved to collect industry best practices. And as you can see, the people who are listed here were all involved in contributing those industry best practices from their experience, from their companies. And then the next step was to develop a playbook, which has just been completed. And going forward, what we're going to be working on is piloting the playbook, helping you who are watching put these practices into action. We thought it would be of interest to present the baseline that was taken during that survey. We had some 88 complete responses, and the baseline average is that 71% strongly agree or agree on these key leadership principles. But what's interesting is that the degree of agreement varied from topic to topic. So for example, leadership promotes quality. There was very strong agreement that leadership is behind that, whereas when it came to certain measures such as formally measuring the cost of quality, the performance was much lower. So as you can see, what we're going to be doing during this conversation is focusing on those that where the biggest gaps were, including measuring cost of quality, looking at prevention versus reaction, talking about prioritization, and we will also look at quality in my role. What was interesting, and what many of the people questioned was, this was a leadership survey. Would most employees agree with leadership's view of themselves and of their approach to prioritizing quality? So we'll be discussing that as we go forward. So our first topic that we're going to talk about is quality in my role. And the way we're going to work is I'm going to be asking Joe about his experience in these areas. Joe, in your previous role at Covidien, you actually led an initiative called Quality Begins With Me. Can you talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, sure, Pat. And first of all, thanks to MDIC for inviting us to present on leadership engagement today. And it's an important topic. It's been an important topic for the Case for Quality for some time. So I think Pat and I are really excited to be part of this session, as well as to be able to speak to the culture of quality. So Pat, with a little bit of history with Covidien, when I was with Covidien several years ago, we were a company that was acquiring a lot of other companies. And during the course of that activity, we implemented what was called a quality improvement program. And that was probably in the 2006, 2007 timeframe. And the idea there was, because we were acquiring so many companies, we had variations in quality systems and variations in process and things, that we wanted to have a way of assessing how quality and operations were integrating these programs, as well as minimizing risk within processes, and really just maturity. How do we drive towards maturity? But in 2000, so we continued that program and throughout the 2015, 2016 timeframe. But in 2011, we had what was characterized as a really poor performance year. And that was something that we viewed through our internal KPIs, internal audit programs, some errors and issues that were occurring within the four walls of Covidien, but also some external audits and even some field actions that we had. So when we gave ourselves a report card in 2011, we were not happy or pleased with the outcome of that year. So leading into goal setting the following year, the CEO of the company requested that we develop a strategic approach to improving the quality culture. And within a couple of weeks, we had taken the platform of our quality improvement program and really started to put in things that were more around culture. So key behaviors and what does good look like, and what does it look like to exhibit the right behaviors in line with the proper quality culture. So really, we started with the top-down communication as to this initiative, what this initiative was going to be and this program was going to be. And so leading into the 2012 calendar year, which was essentially the second quarter of our fiscal year, we launched the Quality Begins With Me program. And within that program, it had, again, key behaviors. It leveraged some of the activities that we were already doing around the quality improvement program. There were assessment questions and things like that to be able to assess where we were from a culture perspective. It was focused primarily on quality and operations, manufacturing, essentially those functions that were closest to the core of product commercialization. But again, because of the past performance, that's where we wanted to start. We wanted to start with those things that were we had viewed as we could have executed better, and how do we do that through either the QIP program or the Quality Begins With Me program.
I imagine it was a pretty comprehensive program, not without some cost. Was there an expected ROI, or was this something that you just pursued on faith?
Well, because we had the report card, right? We knew how we had performed in the previous year. We took it on faith that a lot of the things we were going to do from a culture perspective would inherently improve the overall performance. So we would see better outcomes in our audits. We would see better outcomes in online performance and first pass yields and things like that. So we didn't necessarily target specific areas or key performance indicators to go and improve. Those came along with the program. And eventually within the program, we got to a point where we could show correlation between proper behaviors, good assessment scores, and then fewer complaints per million, fewer defects per million on the floor, fewer NCEs or NCRs, depending on what you consider non-conforming reports. So it came later, but obviously there was an anticipation or an expectation that things would get better.
How did you focus on quality, or not quality, but culture? You could have aimed the focus anywhere you wanted, but you chose culture.
Well, because we had the quality improvement program, which was focused primarily on processes and procedures, it was more about execution and looking at people that exhibit, showing folks, demonstrating what the proper behaviors look like, and really rewarding folks for being courageous. For example, courageous could look like something like, raising your hand when there's an issue on the floor and stopping the line and preventing something from passing from one frontline employee to the next. The awareness, understanding, and having an appreciation for what we did every day and how what we do can affect patients. So in that top-down, bottom-up communication, it started with, the CEO's commitment to improving the culture of quality and really living example from the lead team that, quality is something that begins with me. It's everyone's responsibility, and really understanding that we're doing what's best for the patient. And that helped really drive a lot of the activity that we implemented or we had. So we'll talk about this further, I'm sure, but things like, do you have rewards programs existing today? And how can you leverage those for rewarding the proper behaviors of demonstrating, making the right decisions when it's related to quality? And then what are some of those behaviors and what does it look like? What does it look like to be preventive? What does it look like to be courageous and accountable? Things like that.
Great, thank you. So it sounds like the processes and systems were in place. You needed the workforce to basically follow them in a better way.
Right, and to also demonstrate that there is an empowerment to be able to say, if you see something, and we actually used the concept of see something, say something. So if an assembler, frontline employee is sitting next to another person and they see something that's not right, it's okay to raise your hand. It's okay to stop the line. It's okay to ask for support and assistance as to why this occurred and how to prevent it from occurring.
Great, thank you. Our next area of focus is on prioritizing quality, and it's always difficult in a corporate environment to prioritize quality over cost, especially when shareholders are clamoring for returns and CEOs are thinking quarter to quarter. Site managers, I have found in my time, are constantly competing with other site managers so that their sites can demonstrate the best throughput, the best profitability. How do you counter these, embedded attitudes towards profitability and performance with quality?
So I touched on it a minute ago, having the key behaviors. So we had established 4 key behaviors. First was patient awareness, or being aware of what it is you do. The see something, say something. We also used and continue to use the concept of you touch the product, you touch the patient. So that was a very empowering. Once the employees understood what they did and how that could impact the patient outcome, it unlocked the value of the program. But it also challenged the mid-level managers, to your point. So you've got mid-level managers who are managing production floor and yields and being able to hit their daily targets or their monthly targets. And we actually saw challenges where a frontline employee would bring a quality issue forward, and that manager would have difficulty in determining, should I shut the line down at risk of missing a target? And because the top-down communication was, let's do what's best for the patient, it became a little bit easier. They had to get comfortable with the concept first, right? But once we were able to demonstrate that it was okay to stop the line at the proper time, fix the issue immediately, prevent it from going further down the line and then becoming, something that is either a scrap or a potential escape. There was a much greater comfort around doing, acting differently, doing your job in a different way, where folks are much more empowered and, again, courageous to be able to make those decisions without fear of missing a target or missing a deadline.
One of the situations that I experienced was, again, this idea of competition, and also that where a site was underperforming against certain metrics, maybe at one point the culture had been to chastise the manager and say, you've failed again, you're not meeting expectations. And one of the people that I was working with said that what he was able to do was really flip the whole attitude, so that if there was an underperforming site, the other site managers would jump in and actually work to problem solve and help that site come to a more equal performance level within the organization, in a way basically rewarding collaboration more than bottom line or top line performance. Have you seen that in your work and in your roles?
Yeah, absolutely. I talked a little bit about the QIP program, or the Quality Improvement Program, and that created a lot of competition between our sites, because they were being assessed on a regular basis, and they were given scores, and we were publishing sites that were red, yellow, green, depending on their scores. And so obviously, if you were a green site, everybody wanted to be more like you. If you were a red site, you wanted to figure out, well, either I do this by myself or I ask for help. So the QIP program and the Quality Begins With Me program both really enhanced our ability to be more of an adaptive culture, learning from each other, taking those lessons learned and applying them across the board, so that everybody could get better. And so the QIP program had an assessment process, as well as the Quality Begins With Me program had a very similar appraisal or assessment process, where every year sites needed to show either they were stable in certain areas or they were improving in areas. So there wasn't really any expectation that you would backslide, but you would either stay green where you were green, or a high yellow, almost green or orange. But you wouldn't have too many reds, and those reds are where you would focus your time and attention to improving, so that a more blended score would be a more complete, process, or a more complete approach to continuous improvement.
Understood. And when we talk about prioritizing quality, what were some of the indications that you think companies should look to see that, in fact, quality is being prioritized?
Well, what I've seen and how I've seen it work is starting that tone at the top, making sure that there are incentives for quality. It's not just a quality responsibility. It's not just a quality professional being incentivized for product quality or performance. Everyone shares that. So whether it's quality in the form of overall performance or reliability of the product, other functions that factor into that are held, are incentivized for quality metrics. Overall, I think that's probably one of the most effective ways of sharing the responsibility for quality outside of just the quality organization.
Great, thank you. Now we're going to turn towards prevention versus reaction. And in my experience, companies are always focusing on lagging indicators, perhaps because they're easy to measure. We talk about number of NCRs, CAPA aging. It's just easier to measure those things. Very hard, though, to drive looking in the rearview mirror. Much better to look forward at those proactive or leading indicators. Can you talk a little bit about some of the leading indicators that you have looked at in your career?
Sure. Shown here, we talk about continuous improvement. around, whether it's taking activities from, CAPAs and learnings from CAPAs, and I mentioned being more of a self-learning adaptive culture. It's really being able to take those lessons learned, willing to share those lessons learned across your ecosystem or the number of sites, being willing to implement successful practices and being able to take something that's occurred one place and being able to implement it in another location as a preventive measure. We talk about CAPA, we talk about the value of CAPA, we talk about the challenges of CAPA, but the benefits of the CAPA are those preventive actions and being able to drive more towards a preventive culture, and being able to say, you know what, I may not have this situation, but I have common processes that it could potentially occur. So how do I implement a lessons learned or a successful practice from someplace else to be able to prevent something from occurring rather than preventing something from recurring, right? The other things that we've seen that works really well, and maybe it sounds a bit cliche, but it's about design right first time. Okay, we can all work on efforts to fix it once, fix it forever, but think about being able to design it right first time so you're not in a fix mode. And how do you do that? It's lessons learned, it's employing successful practices, it's learning from some of those lagging indicators, as you mentioned, but it's really about how do you design issues out of your products and design quality in. And I think one of the other important points is you've mentioned, you've got it listed here in the slide around supplier quality. It's how are you partnering with suppliers that live the same type of values that you do. And so when you talk about selection and capability, it's not just the process capability, but what is the culture at that facility or at that supplier. And many suppliers, like many medical device firms, once you create the awareness as to what it is they do, that resonates with them, and they're much more committed to delivering on on the values of quality that the company has that they're supplying to. So, for example, we had the opportunity to go to one of our suppliers that was building a generator box for us, and we sat with the frontline employees that were essentially working with PCB boards and cabinets and putting these things together and assembling them, and we had an opportunity to present to them sort of the finished product, that the box that they were building for us attached to a medical device, and we demonstrated how that medical device works with their box and what could go wrong if their box isn't right. And before that point, they never had made that connection. But through that effort, that site incorporated the Quality Begins With Me program so that they were now living the same values and beliefs that we were, so that there was a stronger partnership. And that helped lead to, better product coming out of the supplier, fewer potential issues, and therefore, again, living the culture of quality.
Did you have any challenges moving people towards those predictive or leading indicators?
Well, yeah, in some ways it's getting comfortable with being able to your point, look forward versus looking backward or looking in the rearview mirror, I think is a good way of putting it, because essentially we're all very used to that. So you had to sort of get used to, well, what is this going to do for me versus, and when will I know versus, oh, it didn't occur, right? So therefore it never happened and I don't have to necessarily worry about it, right? But, and that's the value of the design right first time, and having suppliers involved in the process very early helps. And that's a learning curve too, because a lot of times we like to think that maybe, we might know more than the supplier knows. So you have to really embrace the fact that you're bringing in suppliers early in your design process, and they actually will have ideas that will help prevent issues from occurring. And we've all had examples where if we had only listened to our supplier in the early stages of a design, we could have prevented an issue further down the line. I think that's certainly happened in my career, but again, that's an example of hearing and partnering with the right supplier and having the right core values.
Great, thank you. Our last topic for discussion today is around measuring the value of quality, something that I'm very tuned into. When we did this work stream and actually the white paper, what struck me hearing from all of the collaborators on the project were just the level of impact and how broad or far-reaching the impact was. You know, we are all aware as manufacturers of the poor quality, the impact of poor quality on our costs, our internal and external failure costs. But what we didn't have a real appreciation for, and this was one of the values that MDIC brought to the table, was that provider perspective in terms of what does it mean to healthcare providers in terms of missed procedures or excess inventory or legal fees and fines, whatever the case might be. So that was huge. And then we also learned about the impact of poor quality on the health authorities and the regulators, and ultimately what comes back to the community at large is the added cost of oversight because of these quality failures. So that was important. And then the other piece was, of course, that we typically aren't able to measure the benefits of good quality because we don't really know. It's easy to measure failure, or easier to measure failure, but what is the value of improved customer relationships, improved you know, net promoter score, or whatever the case might be. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what you've done, how you've handled measuring both the failure costs or the costs of poor quality, as well as trying to capture some of the benefits of good quality.
Okay. Oh, you've touched on quite a few things that I think are really important in kind of leading. And you and I go way back on this topic, so I appreciate the conversation on this one. From my perspective and the things that I've seen, I think most, at least in my career, I think one of the hardest things we've ever had to come up with were really determining the cost of poor quality, to your point, because there are so many factors, whether it's internal or external. Where do you measure it? When do you measure it? How do you measure it? Have you ever measured it, or is that something that we just started measuring? So what does your baseline look like? What are the expectations? I think, so when you talk about, we'll talk mainly right now about the cost of poor quality. And you touched on this, there's a lot of opinion and methods vary, right? And so what's the right way to do it? And I don't know, there probably is a right way, but I haven't really discovered what the right way is. We found ways, whether they're the right ways or not, it's hard to say. But we decided, and this is an experience I had when we were with the Quality Begins With Me program, and it kind of goes back to your first question about ROA. We said, well, what is it that we want to measure, right? Or what is it that we can measure? And we really looked at, I would say it's more about, it's not quite the internal failure costs or the external failure costs. We characterized it, and other companies I know have characterized it as the cost of poor execution. And things like, you know, you've built the product, you've released the product, you've shipped the product to your warehouse, and then you find something wrong with it. So it's still within your control. So now there's a cost associated with either bringing that product back for reworks and sorts and inspection, sending folks to your warehouses to do that activity, unboxing, redressing, relabeling, all of those costs that you didn't necessarily incorporate into your standard cost, right? And then if there's an unfortunate escape, then what do? That's to your point about some of the field actions and recalls. And this doesn't include really things like a complaint, right? We understand where complaints fall into the cost of poor quality. So we started measuring those costs, and in the situations where a site was accountable for activity like that because of poor execution, they were held accountable for that cost. So it went against the cost of the other variants. at the site. That changed behavior because now we needed to drive, again, back to the quality begins with me. How are you executing more effectively? So those costs, so you never incur those costs. Once we started to get more consistency around that, we were able to focus on the internal, external, the appraisal, and preventive costs. And where that then starts to manifest itself is in some of those more intangible benefits, where, as we've talked about the case for quality and the value of quality being a competitive advantage. And that may manifest itself in better outcomes. So there's a clinical outcome value. There's economic value, right? So you're having fewer recalls or having more reliability, better product quality. So there's an economic value as well. And then there's that intrinsic value of the culture and the interaction that those companies have with their customers. So looking at the value of quality, not just from an operations and a quality performance perspective, looking at it from an enterprise-wide perspective, and you mentioned Net Promoter Score, right? There's a lot in the Net Promoter Score that is not necessarily focused just on product quality. It's what's it, would you recommend working with this company, right? And why would that be? Well, because the enterprise embraces their role in quality beyond just product quality, but quality of experience and customer centricity and being customer focused and things like that. Those all translate into those intangibles that you want to do business with this company. The incentives are you're going to get good high quality product, you're going to get product that's safe and effective, you're going to get product that gives you good clinical outcomes with economic value. Those are measurable, right? But then it's those intrinsic things that are they're just a great company to work with. Right? They resolve issues, they handle my issues, they handle my questions, they ship on time. It's their, those are the types of things that, companies or, you mentioned stakeholders and hospitals and payers, providers are all looking for what's the economic value first, as well as the clinical outcome value.
Great, thank you. So that pretty much covers the prioritized topics that we had selected. What I'd like to do is turn towards next steps. And where we're at with the playbook is that the playbook has been completed. It's about to be published and should be by the time of this viewing. The next step is to pilot it. And Joe, I wondered if you had any thoughts in terms of how companies might want to go about piloting any of these leading practices. Which ones should they choose? Is there a process that they should follow?
Well, I think that when we look at sort of going back to the survey and the areas within the survey where you've got good, strong agreement, right? So do you have leadership that promotes the quality, the value of quality or the culture of quality? If the answer is yes, that's a really good start, right? Because sometimes that's one of the hardest things to do is to get folks to start talking about the quality culture. But if you've got leadership that promotes quality, that's a great start. When you look at things like the quality and my role, again, the value there is that folks outside of the quality function are viewing their role as a quality function. That they, again, touch the product, they touch the patient, that awareness piece that we talked about earlier. When you have, whether it's performance measures and reviews, it goes into how are folks incentivized for delivering high quality products, and whether it's, maintaining a high level of product quality through internal audits, inspections, performance, very few complaints, how are folks rewarded and incentivized for that? So my advice would be to kind of look at these categories, and I think it's telling because for a lot of us, we all agree that we've got a lot of things already in place that we can leverage. The challenge is, and we've talked about some of them already, is how do you get to a more of a measure of cost of quality, which again, those methods vary. So nobody does it the same. Maybe we do it similarly, but not exactly the same, and we get to a number, and we're comfortable with that number, whatever that means to you or to me. But then it becomes that being much more preventive. And we're starting to see a lot more focus on ways companies can be more preventive. So there are more tools out there available that help drive right first time design, help drive the transition from design transfer to production, and how do you transfer designed right first time products into production and mass produce. So we're starting to see a lot of influence there in the advantages of that, of doing it right in the design and then translating it into manufacturing, translating that into your suppliers. So this is a great framework to say, you know what, I do this well, I do that well, let's pick a few of them and build upon them, and then eventually get to those that maybe we could expand on further, but let's get the momentum started around the things you already are doing and leverage those, whether it's a communication program, a rewards program, the ways to communicate, awareness and training. These are all things that we all probably have. We just have to put some elements of the quality piece to it and leverage those programs.
It's sounding like some of these, such as leadership promoting quality, is a prerequisite for doing some of the more challenging practices like measuring the cost of quality. But is all hope lost if, let's say, your company isn't in a place where leadership is actively promoting quality? Does that mean you can't attack any of these?
No, absolutely not. I think there's enough opportunity to demonstrate, hey, we did something here. For example, let's say we partner with manufacturing on something as simple as creating awareness on the front line. That maybe we didn't do that enough. That builds momentum from the ground up. Let's talk about, we all probably have town hall meetings. We all probably have monthly meetings with our staff. Creating that awareness. And one thing that I know many companies do is they get customers or patients to come in and talk about their experience, whether it's their experience with the product or their experience as a result of the use of the product on them. Those are things that we can all do. And again, I don't think there's any leader out there that wouldn't use that as a great opportunity to demonstrate how important their products are. And again, it goes back to do what's best for the patient, do what's right for the patient. I mean, we wouldn't be in this job if we didn't all believe that.
Great. Well, I think that covers it. Thank you so much for your time today, Joe, and really appreciate MDIC letting us present the output of this work stream.
Yeah, thank you, Pat.
I want to thank you for joining the MDIC CAPA Process Improvement Program information session. My name is Catherine Merrill. I'm a Global Quality and Regulatory Program Director at Medtronic, but I'm also working on behalf of MDIC as the program chair for this program. So in addition to being known as the CAPA Process Improvement Pilot, it's also more commonly known as the hashtag Make CAPA Cool program. And the goal of the program is to focus organizations within the CAPA process on problem solving to enable the organizations to improve faster. So I'll be providing a program overview for those of you who are not familiar with the topic yet. And then I will hand it over to Dan Beener, who is the quality site lead for our Edward Life Sciences site in Draper. And his site was the first to join the pilot, so he will be sharing from his experiences. You will also hear from Bleda Bunici, who's the Case for Quality team lead at CDRH at FDA. And she and Marc-Henri Winter continue to be critical team members as a part of this program. So this slide is going to give you a whirlwind tour of the Make CAPA Cool program. Again, for those of you who might not be as familiar with this topic. And then I have a number of slides that talk you through some of the benefits that we're seeing, some of the initial behavior changes that we're seeing at pilot sites, and then you'll hear from both Dan and Bleda. So first, as far as the program summary, this initially started because of an industry-wide struggle that was resulting from the current CAPA framework. And basically that is because thousands of employees really love to solve problems, but they don't necessarily want a CAPA, is what we found. And so the team's goal is to leverage cross-industry best practices to fundamentally recast CAPA as a continuous improvement framework. And so the goal would be to allow organizations to efficiently execute improvements that matter. So the first part of the presentation I'll go over is around how we went about developing the risk-based approach to CAPA. So there were quite a few face-to-faces that we had. We followed a structured process. But there's two items that I wanted to highlight to you, and these are the ones that we really wanted to use as we implemented or designed the risk-based framework. And the information we first got was from an industry survey where we captured 300 plus pain points and over 400 ideas for improvement. We looked through all of them and we filtered through them and identified the top 3 pain points, which are listed here. The first one being it's not clear when to open a CAPA. It's not clear the relationship with other systems, namely the nonconformance or the continuous improvement process, which can cause overlaps and duplication. There's also a lack of planned resources for CAPA. So the second activity that we completed that fed into the risk-based approach was a benchmarking process where we were able to benchmark 10 cross-sector interviews that were across aerospace, finance, automotive, the ex-head of Shingle we got to interview. So this was one of my favorite parts of the development process, given my continuous improvement background. And we looked through all of the data that we got quite a bit, and we filtered through and looked for what was common at these organizations that were known for continuous improvement. And we identified what we wanted to carry over into the design of our risk-based approach. And so we completed that, and I just wanted to share some of the things that we identified as key. The first one points to the fact that it's really important to allow organizations to be able to prioritize. And so we saw that if everything is important, essentially nothing is. And the need for there to be a way to prioritize from the top of the organization at the leadership level down to the work that was being done on the manufacturing floor. And we saw that they all had a very strong link to the customer, so they knew the value of their work directly to the customer. So for us in the med device space, that would be our patients. And so in addition to this, each one of them, it sort of followed that they had a risk-based approach to CAPA, or problem solving, where not all problems were treated the same. And they also had internal problems which were addressed at the lowest possible level and escalated as needed. So we leveraged these learnings to develop the risk-based CAPA framework, which was published in a white paper. We aligned with regulations to ensure that it met the intent of the regulations. We evaluated it in retrospective reviews, which was essentially like a paper pilot. And we did recommend that it be tested in a live pilot. And I did want to say, before we even go into a description of the pilot itself, that we had and continue to have an extremely engaged group of people. We're like 30 members strong. We have about 15 organizations represented, and they continue to grow. So what we're seeing is everybody pretty much wants to talk to CAPA. So we're actually having additional people join the team quite regularly. So it's been a very dynamic and engaged team. So as part of the pilot, I had a number of things I wanted to share with you. First, there are 20 sites that are enrolled. So right now we have 2 Edward Life Sciences sites. So Dan will tell you a little bit about one of those. Medtronic has 3 in the program. Baxter has 1, Illumina has 1, Stryker has 6 sites, Cook Medical has one, Elcon has two, Abbott has two, Celanova has one, and our most recent addition to the pilot is Beckman Coulter. So as they start the pilot, I wanted to let you know that we have quite a bit of support for pilot sites that join. We have a standard material set that's been developed that includes a playbook that talks you through how you might consider updating your internal procedures, as well as standard data collection tools that are housed at McKinsey to ensure confidentiality and consistency. In addition to that, one of the biggest concerns that organizations would voice is around the audit response. And so that is one of our key metrics of the pilot, is that we would get positive audit response. And I do have a slide later in this presentation that'll give you a taste of what we're seeing. So we did develop a regulatory strategy to help sites think through what they need to do. And we do have audit support as a part of that. And then my favorite part of the program is this bi-weekly meeting that we have to provide supports to the pilot sites. It's our Make CAPA Cool broader team, which does include members of FDA. And this we use to gather lessons learned, to remove obstacles for sites, as well as to provide feedback and to strengthen the framework as we learn. And the goal of this is to learn early and often within the pilot versus waiting until the end and realizing we would like to change something. So the timeline right now is that the pilot site data collection will be completed in April, and with a white paper by the end of next year. I will say we've had discussions around potentially continuing the data collection past April, depending on what we see, based on the fact that a lot of the pilot sites are really getting going now, as there was some delay due to the COVID impact. But we do expect the white paper by the end of next year. So now I'm going to talk through the working group strategy that we have as we look at the compliant example of a risk-based CAPA framework. And I will say we recognize that there's more than one way to be compliant. We are piloting one compliant version. And as we pilot the framework, we're building, iterating, testing, and learning and refining the elements of the framework. And as we're doing that, we're focused on ensuring that it continues to be patient-centric, that CAPA escalations are clear, that it's focused on problem solving. The goal is to make the compliance piece easier so that the focus can be moved more fully upon the problem solving. The other thing we want to make sure is that it continues to be risk-based, it's flexible, and it's enabling faster improvements. And so the estimate is we're about 60% complete. This is not a scientific number. This is just based on the number of elements that we've been able to do a deep dive into. And so I'll have a little bit more on the next slide to explain how we're going about doing that into the individual framework elements. So initially, when we designed the framework, we designed it with a lot of discussion and consideration around how such a framework would drive behavior within the organization. And as we designed it, we were hoping that it would encourage improvement in the connected systems. And we're actually seeing this at the organizations that have begun to pilot, as well as those that are a little bit more mature in the pilot. So it does encourage the improvement within the connected systems. So one of those examples is the risk assessments. So the framework has multiple risk assessments that encourage users to ensure the risk management process is current and up to date. It causes them to ask a lot more questions about risk than they typically might. And we focus on both product risk as well as QMS or compliance risk. The next area that we're noticing the framework driving improvements in is the trending processes. So it has a trend-specific path in the framework, and that does promote a well-defined trending program. So if you don't have a well-defined trending program, as you use the CAPA process, it is going to encourage improvements in that space. The next one is measuring and monitoring. And so we've seen within the framework as it's designed today that the full benefits of the framework, namely the fast track CAPA process or just the monitoring of the CAPA process itself, are available to organizations with strong measurement and monitoring systems, which does promote the establishment of stronger controls. So the more you use the framework, the more you'll benefit from strengthening those ongoing controls. The last one is for problem solving. So we really looked when we designed the program to the framework to ensure that the framework encouraged the training of problem solving in an organization at all levels of the organization. And we are seeing that the full benefits of the framework would be available to those with strong problem solving programs. And this would in turn increase the resources available for the fast track CAPA work. The last thing I wanted to share with you on this slide is around the framework examples. So if you look at these 4 elements of the framework that aren't the actual corrective action or the preventative action, but they're supporting elements within the risk-based approach, what we're finding as a team is having real life examples available to people to help illustrate the intent of the individual framework elements is important to facilitate other organizations potentially implementing the risk-based approach. And so it's not to drive additional requirements in the framework. We recognize there's more ways than one to be compliant, but sometimes it's just a lot easier to see an example of something to know, okay, what was their intent behind this element? And so as a team, sort of as a sub-team, we're meeting as a group to design real life examples of a best practice example of what each one of these would look like. And we are going to look at the framework to ensure that it allows flexibility. So again, we're not trying to drive in additional requirements, but we have recognized the need to have a couple of examples to share the intent with people. More to come as we move forward. The next 3 or 4 slides really are a start of the benefits that we've started to see. And so because we've had sites like Edwards Life Sciences that have been in from the beginning of the year versus those that some have just started data collection and others are really close to starting this year, we are looking at sort of the beginning of the data that we could see. But the first set of benefits that we intended to get when we designed the framework is we wanted to make sure that we would know when to open a CAPA, that we would get faster problem solving resolution, that we would promote continuous improvement, that it would be less burden and cost to the organization, that our employees would be excited and engaged in the process, pretty much at all levels of the organization, able to engage in a corrective action or preventative action, and that the framework was compliant to regulations. And the ultimate goal that we had was that we would have high quality products and services for our patients. So the exciting part is we are actually seeing, either in the more mature sites, we're seeing these definitely, but we are seeing even hints or shadows of this behavior even really early on in the pilots that have just started to collect data. So we're seeing clear CAPA escalation decisions. We're seeing that the CAPA is open to a larger resource pool. We have faster CAPA cycles for lower risk issues, which you'll hear a little bit about later in this presentation. As I just presented, the connected systems are being strengthened. Continuous improvement is being promoted. More preventative actions are being considered, namely around the fast track CAPA process because it's so easy to do them. And the effectiveness check lends itself well to the preventative action space. And employees are actually communicating that they're excited to try the fast track CAPA, which is definitely something our team really was happy to hear. And then again, I'll have a slide that shows you the positive audit results we've been getting. So just to summarize, the framework does appear to be supporting the quality behaviors we were looking to drive when we designed the risk-based approach. So the next 3 slides are about the initial pilots data. And so this one's just a real quick summary for those of you who aren't as familiar with what a pilot site will go through when they enroll. So you'll start with the enrollment into the pilot. Then there's a preparation phase for the pilot where you get trained, you get to look at your internal processes and determine how you want to update them to get ready to actively collect data. You then actively begin collecting data, and then you complete a 3-month progress check with the FDA, which Bleda is going to speak a little bit more today about. And I will say that the Medtronic sites have found that this is a very valuable activity. We're only partway through our 3-month progress checks, but we have found that the questions that are asked and the feedback that is given really is helping us with the pilot and with application of the framework. And so the other thing that happened as far as what we started with, we had a 2-day kickoff event to ready pilot site leaders to engage in the pilot earlier at the early part of this year. I will tell you that when you start a pilot, it is now a 2-hour to a 2.5-hour training session that you'll have with me. The more you do something, the more streamlined it gets. So we've taken 2 days and we've packed it into 2 hours. So you won't be released with no training. If you do prefer to have that training session, it will be available to you. We do have 20 enrolled sites across 10 organizations, and we've had 50 core team meetings, those bi-weekly meetings since the beginning. We've had actually more if you include the sub-team meetings, but the reason that's included here is just to let you know that our team is really engaged and we're getting a lot of value around the interaction and the learnings we're getting from the pilot. So the next 2 slides are around the quarterly survey that we're taking. And so as part of the data collection, we're collecting individual data points around each one of the CAPAs that are processed through the system. But the other thing we're doing is on a quarterly basis, we're collecting a survey from a diverse group of people at each one of the sites. And the survey results are confidential, but you send it to direct manufacturing support, from engineering, from regulatory and quality, or from others like leadership within the organization. And what we're looking for is the survey was designed to gather information about how the framework and whether it was addressing the top 3 pain points that I addressed earlier in the presentation. And so we're looking for it to shift towards addressing those pain points. But what you'll see here from the baseline survey, so we have enough baseline survey data points to show you in a way that's aggregated and therefore maintaining the confidentiality. What we found is out of the 199 responses, 75% of the respondents typically spend 50% or more time on the documentation of the CAPA. So when you split it between problem solving and documentation, today they're doing more than 50% of their time is on documentation. And so obviously we want to put the focus more on the problem solving piece of it. But this is the baseline. It shows you the need. The second one gives you a hint at the results that are coming, so you don't have to read all the little words that are on here, but the idea is these are each of the survey questions that were designed to get after those 3 pain points. And you'll notice the movement from the gray dots to the blue dots. It's moving in the right direction. And so we're even in the few quarterly surveys that we've been able to send out. Again, we'll have a lot more data going into next year, but we've gotten data to show that we're moving in the right direction, which really is quite exciting. And I did put a couple of quotes in here because I thought you guys would be interested. These came directly from the surveys. Obviously, they're confidential, but they're asked to provide their input on the process. So the first quote was, "The CAPA pilot process is amazing. It allows it to be nimble and move quickly while providing common sense level of documentation." The next one, "It encourages employees to take more action through the use of fast track CAPA process." And then the subsystem corrective actions allow my team to quickly implement corrective action for low risk issues to prevent recurrence and not waste hours of time rewriting the same information in a standalone CAPA. So the cool thing I wanted to note about these quotes is these come from CAPA users, not necessarily our CAPA pilot site leaders. So those that are using it are seeing the difference. The last slide I'll go through before I hand it off to Dan is really one that will give you feedback from the auditors and the pilot site leaders. I thought you would be interested in, well, what are the auditors saying? And so I've got some quotes that we've heard from them. I know from both internal and external auditors, they've indicated that the online training, which is a 35-minute training that's attached to the MDIC website, and the white paper itself are very helpful. So if you're interested in more information, feel free to go there. If you would like to get a little bit more information on the framework itself, it's contained in there. And then we had one lead MD staff auditor say that it was an interesting and exciting pilot. And then we had an RNQA director indicating that their auditor was excited to hear about their involvement in the CAPA pilot. And I will tell you, we didn't just hunt and pick for the good comments. I don't think I haven't heard of any bad comments that we've had. We did have one auditor that had questions about the framework itself, and she reached out to our auditor hotline to the FDA team members, both Bleda and Marc-Henri, and was able to resolve her concerns and questions. And so the auditor hotline that we put in place worked really well. So from what we've seen so far, the auditor resources that we put together, the audit memo, the online training, the surveys, we're actually asking the auditors to complete a survey on the CAPA process if they can, and then the hotline, they're working really well. And then the other thing I wanted to show you is from the pilot sites, the responses that we're hearing as a part of the pilot site report outs at the biweekly team meeting sort of give you an idea of the types of results that we're getting. So the reason I'm sharing these is we don't have the data on the individual CAPAs yet, even though we're collecting them. It's because we need to have enough data to make sure that it can be shared in aggregate and maintain that confidentiality. But you'll see the results within these quotes. So from one of the pilot sites, it says we're able to close our fast track CAPA in 30 days. So employees are excited about the process. The next one is our senior leadership is asking about how we can begin to deploy this company-wide. And they're already thinking, okay, I'm getting this benefit. How do I spread it out? So, and there's multiple organizations that are talking about this. It's not just one. And then our investigation and action phases are closing in less than 60 days. This means we can implement our improvements faster. I think that's the key thing we're seeing that we really enjoy is the fact that we have an issue and we can implement improvements and we can continuously improve our systems faster. So the last one is we're looking into preventative actions more than before because of the fast track CAPA process. So people are actually saying, hey, you know, let's look at what we can do to prevent this because the fast track CAPA process really lends itself really well to those types of actions. And employees are more willing to propose a quick improvement even when it's not required. So we are seeing people are electing to do corrective action even when the framework doesn't ask for it. So with that, I wanted to hand it over to Dan Beener to share his experiences.
Hi, Catherine. Thanks very much for all that you've presented here and for sharing this great program. You know, this is a program that we became aware of at Edwards Life Sciences about halfway through the year, last year in 2019. And as we began to look into it, recognized that this could potentially have tremendous value to our organization and for me specifically at my site in the Draper, Utah facility. And so we were very enthusiastic about joining into this group and participating with the team, and you know had the great privilege of being the first site to go live with our pilot execution. And we were able to do that about the beginning of February of 2020. We were able to get that started just before a lot of the complications of COVID started to affect a lot of people's intentions for the year. As we began to execute this CAPA pilot, we did definitely start noticing that that this pilot program was going to fundamentally change the way that we thought about CAPA. We were in a situation where we had a well-defined but fairly rigid CAPA system, where any and all corrective actions were treated basically with the same priority, with the same degree of thoroughness, with the same degree of investigation depth and things like that, regardless of what the issue actually was. And as a result, we had a large number of CAPAs active in the site, and we were constantly opening new CAPAs and just trying to stay ahead of the game in all of that CAPA activity. And as soon as we started into the pilot program, what we saw was that we were immediately able to divert a large number of those issues into the fast track CAPA pathway. And the fast track CAPA enabled us to resolve these issues much more quickly and use a lot of the existing controls, the existing mitigations and alerting mechanisms that we already had in place to help ensure effectiveness of the CAPAs on an ongoing basis. And as a result, what we saw was that over the course of these last 9 months, we've been able to decrease the volume of open CAPAs at our site by 60%. And for those of you that try to manage the workload around CAPAs, you recognize that that is a huge value. We've been able to allow the people that are typically owning those CAPAs to focus on more important, more critical work and things that really matter to the patient, and take care of the more straightforward corrective actions, the more simple investigations, with the level of effort that's requisite to the problem that was presented. Now, you might think that what I'm really saying is, oh, we just stopped taking corrective actions. That's not the case. During these 9 months, we've been able to initiate 82 fast track CAPAs, and we've been able to get 76 of them completed during that time. And 80% of those that we've been able to complete, we've been able to do in 30 days or less, 90% of them within 60 days. By way of comparison, the average standalone CAPA that we completed in the year 2019, prior to starting the CAPA pilot process, took us 200 days. So this is a tremendous improvement in the speed and efficiency with which we can implement these corrective actions. The other thing that that is really telling about how effective the pilot program is, and how the framework helps you to make decisions about what's critical to work on, is that prior to starting the CAPA pilot, we were opening CAPAs at a rate of about 14% of the NCRs that we encountered during production. And since starting the CAPA pilot process, we've been able to see that rate drop to about 1.5%. And this is talking about external, standalone, full-on CAPAs. So what that means is, a roughly tenfold decrease in the rate of opening an external CAPA, which has really allowed us to focus our energy and our efforts on those things that really matter the most. The CAPAs that we do open, the external CAPAs that we do open, are on the things that we really do see as being the most critical to understanding and to solving a problem with a thorough, methodical approach.
So a lot of times we hear from industry partners or even participants in the CAPA that there's still a fear of how this framework will be perceived by auditing organizations, so their auditor or even FDA investigators. And what we always say is that the risk-based framework is supported by the regulatory requirements. The QS preamble, specifically comment 159, states that action should be taken commensurate with the risk encounter. Further, to support the framework that was defined, comment 161 of the preamble states that it recognizes the need that at times an in-depth investigation will be necessary, while other times a simple investigation is appropriate. And the organization can follow their trend analysis or other appropriate tools to further define or determine whether the action was acceptable. So you can see that this is essentially the idea that we try to incorporate as part of the CAPA improvement framework. Similarly, ISO 1345, so section 4.1.3, states that it is appropriate to implement a risk-based approach. Part of this pilot, we also defined a 3-month progress check. Essentially what that is that the organization that is piloting the framework meets one-on-one with myself as well as Mark Henry Winter, which is part of MDSAP, and we review the established procedures as well as examples to that determine how the process has been implemented. That has allowed for a great engagement, huge learning opportunity, identifying where in the framework we need potentially to make changes. We revised some of the terminologies to help support the sites for it to be consistent with both ISO and 820. But most importantly, I think these checkpoints have highlighted for the organization some of the areas that need to be more mature or areas that they can further improve. We want to move forward to allow the organizations to implement a risk-based approach. As Catherine mentioned earlier, this is one way to do it. There might be other ways out there that have worked well, but identifying a process that really adds value to the organization, solve problems quicker, and to want to solve problems, empowering the people is important, instead of identifying a process just to meet that compliance requirement. So as part of this process, we continue to learn. The goal is to draft another white paper, and now we're even thinking about how do we make this global, or how can other organizations implement a similar approach, or even the framework itself, even if they're not part of the pilot program. We recognize that a lot of activities that we're doing in the pilot are really geared towards improving and further understanding the framework, and we may not be able to meet with everyone one-on-one, but really is to speak to the benefits that the organizations have encountered, and to further align in the requirements as a industry as a whole. And now I'm going to turn it back to Catherine.
Yeah, so I wanted to thank you, Bleda. I want to close out this session by letting you know that you could learn more on the MDIC website. Either you could read the white paper or complete the online training that we've referred to. It's about 35 minutes. So if you do want to know a little bit more about the framework, it's there. And there have been some clarifications and updates since then, but the main elements remain the same. And you could, if you continue to have questions, contact the MDIC Case for Quality Program Manager, Desiree Steele, and her email is right here, or me as the program chair if you're interested in participating. And I have included the MDIC website here for the Make CAPA Cool program. And so we just want to thank you for joining our session, and just wanted to let you know that we're here to support you if you have any questions or you'd like to participate. Thanks.
That was a wonderful panel discussion, and I think that is a great point to conclude on here today. On behalf of myself and MDIC, I thank you all for your participation on these terrific panels. This has been very helpful on highlighting the transition of Case for Quality to a collaborative community, the culture of quality, and the Make CAPA Cool pilot study. And on that note, thank you again. I hope you have a wonderful day, and please tune in to tomorrow's portion of the Case for Quality Collaborative Community Forum. Bye now.
So I guess I'll take a shot at Mark at your couple of questions. I'll take the second one first with regard to membership of MDIC to participate. Certainly in the working groups, we've had non-MDIC members participating in working groups, so we certainly encourage anyone who wants to participate in a working group to feel free to attend forums and sign up for the working groups, because that's really where we see a lot of cross-functional and diverse support and input. So it's really valuable to have folks that are not necessarily MDIC members participating in those working groups. But ideally, we would like to see participants be MDIC members, but you don't have to be a member to participate in a working group. But we do have some, things like, steering committees and things like that we would prefer membership coming from the MDIC membership. And then with regard to the AMI, your question about AMI and IMDRF, I know Bleda responded to the question about Make CAPA Cool and the work that's been done, and maybe others can answer this question. But I do know that in some of the working groups, as part of our stakeholder assessments and reaching out for benchmark data and things like that, we do consider. So for example, when we were looking at the early phases of quality as a career, we did look to see what other programs and curriculum were out there. So we looked at AMI and ASQ and things like that to see, in RAPS, to see what other materials were out there. So it might be helpful for others to talk about that. But again, it's from a benchmarking versus sort of calibration. I'm assuming your question is more about calibration than benchmarking. Getting their input and collaborating with them. So.
Can I take a turn here? I think there was a question from a viewer about the fast track CAPAs and whether they were excluded from the volume chart that I had presented. So to directly answer that question, I can say yes, those are excluded from the volume chart that I had presented. The intent of that was just to show the reduction in the number of full-on standalone CAPAs that needed to be initiated to address the serious issues or the more complex issues. Whereas the fast track CAPAs, because they're more straightforward in nature, they don't represent the same workload. They don't really represent the same burden on the owners that typically take care of those actions. So I wanted to make a distinction between those two. Thanks for your question. I hope that answers it for you.
This is Catherine Merrill. I saw a question around whether for the Make CAPA Cool program, whether there was effort to involve smaller manufacturers, because the majority of the pilot participants so far have been the larger organizations. And I just wanted to let everybody know that we've engaged with AdvaMed, and they're helping us connect with some of the smaller manufacturers that might give us a different look at how the risk-based approach would work at their organizations.
As just a comment to your recent comment about that you help write guidance of GHCF, and that is the handbook on ISO 30. Defining the pilot framework, we really looked at really closely to the ISO and 820 requirements, and we wanted to make sure that the framework defined still meets regulatory requirements. There's still work to be done in terms of ensuring that this pilot can be adapted globally, or making sure that everyone has the opportunity to be in alignment with a risk-based framework approach. And as mentioned during the presentation, you know, there might be other ways to adapt a risk-based approach. What we recognized as part of the framework and the participants as part of the 3-month check, the framework really highlighted areas that might really trending and as their and framework. So we do recognize that we still need some work on making sure that really communicating expectations, and that is part of the plan for the future.
Joe, Catherine, Bleda, thank you so much for those answers. I just wanted to ask the attendees that are still online if they had any other questions. I think we've answered all the submitted questions. So please don't be shy. Well, will we have a moment? Do maybe the panelists have any final comments or anything that they might want to say that we that's come up since we just presented the presentations?
This is Bleta. I did answer a question in the chat, the Q&A, but maybe I'll speak to that a little bit as well. The question was around whether we're engaging other regulatory auditors on the CAPA framework to receive their feedback. Catherine spoke a little bit about that during her presentation, and I think some of the other members as well. We have presented the framework to, as part of the MDIC forum, and as well as other forums that are facilitated by our group to precise input and their feedback. At the time, what we heard was that it was in line with with their expectation of what they expect to see as part of their audits. But in addition to that, many of the sites that have enrolled in the CAPA pilot have been audited, and we received great feedback so far from those auditors. I think some of the improvements that we've made, we mentioned some of the terminologies that we revised as part of the framework was really highlighted from some of the feedback that we received from the auditing organization. Example and monitoring. Actually, we had tracked and wanted to we're aligning with the GHTF guidances available, as well as aligning with the medical device on what the expectation is to measure monitoring. And to continue gathering their input and feedback. So that's part of the working group. We also have a member from MDIC. So we really rely on Mark Henry Winter to provide that support so as moving forward, we can continue aligning with the expectations from not just FDA expectations, there are.
Thank you, Bleda. Mark Swanson, did I see you post a new question in there as we were answering one?
See more question on Fast CAPA. Is Fast Track CAPA intended to be done in the CAPA system or something else? I thought as CAPA in the feedback. I'll take this, and then I'm going to have Dan maybe add to the response as I is implementing the framework.
Yeah, sure.
Seen it in multiple ways. Some sites have implemented the fast track as part of their current systems that have in place. Others have identified a new system, for example, handling fast track within their non-conformances or engineering change orders, as long as the document and the CAPA regulations, such as ensuring that the issue has been identified, the root cause, as well as the part of the framework allows for organization to the activities that are conducted part of the system are available to them. Maybe Dan, you can add to what Edwards is currently doing and how you're implementing FAST CAPA.
Sure. Yeah. You know, just to supplement what Bleda had to say about that, you know, I think that it depends very much on what kind of CAPA system you're already working in within your organization and what kind of flexibility that system has. In our experience, what we found was that instead of trying to house the fast track CAPA within our traditional CAPA system, that our some of our other subsystems, namely the NCR subsystem, had the flexibility to allow us to meet the documentation standards of a corrective action within the NCR itself. And we were able to include things like you know, the details of the investigation, the people involved, the impact on the ability to meet regulatory requirements, effectiveness monitoring criteria and results, all within the NCR. And so that, and honestly, that's one of the ways that we've been able to accelerate the closure of those fast tracks. So, you know, it depends on the flexibility of the system that you have, and it just depends on how you want to structure that. But fundamentally, there's no, you know, there doesn't have to be a procedural requirement that it gets housed within your traditional campus.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. I think another question was asked that, you know, it seems like industry might be a little slow to come along MDIC, even within medical device, Medical Alley, where MDIC originated from. How do we get wider involvement? I think that's a great question. I think I think we're already getting more involvement and definitely more interest in involvement after the announcement of Case for Quality as a collaborative community. I think that helped people become more aware of Case for Quality, and also see that it's gonna be here for a long time, right? It's a continuing program that's only gonna grow. Another way I think we're looking to get more involvement is we're looking to include payer, provider, and patient groups. And I think that's going to help. You know, I think more pilot studies like the one that we kicked off this year, the Accelerate Sustainable Capability pilot study, is bringing in new interest from companies that have not previously participated. And then I think, and Catherine will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that we reached our goal of number of participants in the Make CAPA Cool study even faster than we had planned or expected to. So I'll let any of the other panelists maybe speak to the wider involvement question also.
Yeah, so to add to what Alan said, we had initially put a goal of a minimum of 20 sites participating in the pilot. But if there's anybody who's listening that is interested in joining the pilot, we've gotten approval for including additional sites in the pilot program. So I just wanted to put that out there. And we are specifically trying to target some of the smaller organizations if we can.
Hey, Alan, it looks like there was another follow-up question to the idea of doing corrective action outside of the CAPA system, and that being seen as a compliance risk. I can speak to this a little bit, you know, and acknowledge that, yeah, this is something that we've talked about extensively within our MDIC, you know, Make CAPA Cool bi-weekly calls and all of the team meetings that we've gone through. And that's been one of the great benefits of participating in programs like this, is that we get to collaborate and, you know, bring up issues like this and solve them, you know, as a group, and you know, get bounce ideas off of each other. You know, the use of other systems besides the CAPA system for fast track CAPAs, you know, the most important thing to recognize is just how to be compliant with the, you know, with the regulations that exist. And, you know, in our situation, what we recognize as being, you know, something critical to being able to do that is to make sure that we had the ability to keep track of when we were doing those fast track CAPAs, so that we could demonstrate that we had control of the system. But fundamentally, you know, what the regulations are asking us to do is to make sure that we're taking the appropriate action and following up with those when we are doing corrective action. So if you can demonstrate that, you know, then you are compliant.
Yeah. And to add to what Dan just said, it's really important when you look at the framework that the idea of the fast track CAPA, even though it's not in a standalone CAPA record potentially, it is still a CAPA. And so it's that shift in mindset that provided that it meets the intent of the regulations, a corrective action is a corrective action. So it doesn't necessarily have to be in a standalone CAPA record. So that was one of the key distinctions that we talked a lot about as a team.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that clarification, Catherine. I think that's a key point for folks to remember. Thank you. Please, any more questions from folks still on the line, or any topics that, you know, related to the presentation today they might like to discuss? I know we're a little bit over on time, but folks are still here.
Al, and I think there's a question in the Q&A for you. Does my company have to be a member of MDIC to participate in the community?
Oh, thank you.
Or the work?
No, membership is not a requirement. Non-member companies have and do participate in many of the activities and working groups, initiatives that are underway. Of course, membership is always, you know, promoted and desirable as it comes with other benefits. And you know, membership is tailored to the organization and the level of the organization. So if a non-member company is interested in participating, please reach out to me or Desiree Steele directly. You can find my contact information on the MDIC website under Case for Quality or under staff. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you have and make your involvement and potential membership as smooth and painless as possible. Well, I think we'll give it like 30 more seconds, and if we don't have any new questions, I think we can wrap up.
If I could play Jeopardy music, I would.
Pardon, was that a question? I couldn't quite hear it.
Oh, I'm sorry. I said if I could play Jeopardy music, I would.
I know, right? Well, I'll go ahead and say thank you, everyone. All the panelists, thank you very much for all the work you put into the panels and staying on for Q&A. Greatly appreciated as always. To all the attendees that are still online, thank you for asking questions and participating in this dialogue. And for all the attendees that did listen into this, thank you for taking time out of today. And then remember, the video will be available for viewing later. And the slides, if they came across blurry for anyone, the presentations will be available online also, and those will be clear. Sometimes just the streaming content, it comes out a little bit blurry for some folks, but I want to let you know that all the content will be available after this session, and same with tomorrow's session. So thank you very much. And on behalf of MDIC and the panelists, thank you again, and look forward to everyone signing in and listening to tomorrow's forum session. Thanks all.
Very good. Thank you.